Welcome to the Geeky Chocolate Extravaganza. My name is Heather, and I am so happy to introduce two of our favorite cookie friends. We've got Jeanette and Laurie from Blyss Cookies, who we have been dear friends with. I was trying to think for how many years. It's been a long time. We actually met them through a cookie convention that was here, CookieCon, and we were blown away. Our dad absolutely fell in love with their fish cookie. Do you remember that one? And we were introduced to them and found out they were also from Utah, and we thought this is something that we needed to connect with, because not only do they make the most beautiful airbrushed and stenciled cookies, but they taste amazing. And I think this is why we clicked so well, is because this was right when royal icing cookies were becoming such a big trend, and everyone was making them, but we're saying they look great, but they don't taste very good. And you guys were introduced to cookie making through your mom, right? Growing up making cookies and doing things. And she emphasized always that things needed to taste good, right? And so you guys took this same technique and brought it to the royal ice sugar cookie world. And I'm always blown away. First off, I love when they use their almond, but then they bring the most unique flavors, so much fun, but then make them so beautiful. How did you guys get started in transitioning from the traditional buttercream cookies to the royal iced cookies that you guys do now?
We had some, design ideas that we were trying to do with the buttercream, and the buttercream tastes delicious and everybody loves it, but it's just not, you don't have the same control with the buttercream that you do with the royal icing.
You guys are such artists. Every time we've tried to plan classes, you guys will send a drawing of what we're going to do, and to see them take a drawing to a cookie, to see it actually happen and have students leave with these beautiful cookies, it's a testimony of your guys' talent and your ability to do these things. They are so talented. Each class that they do here at Ursa Geeky, I'm always trying to reach in and do an airbrush, and I'm yeah, I'm not that talented. I'm so excited to introduce you guys. If you're not familiar, they have an amazing website that features all of their recipes and so many great ideas. You guys have collaborated with several companies out there, designing your own cookie cutters and stencils and all sorts of things. So I highly encourage you guys to check out their website. But today we're going to be making and focusing on their sugar cookie recipe, because in order for a sugar cookie to be so great, it's got to taste good and have the right base, right? Right. So tell us what is different. Is there any ingredients or steps that you take when you're making your sugar cookie dough that you're careful with?
So we started with our mom's recipe, and she never really used it exactly the same way that we use it now, but she never was particular about her ingredients. So when we first started with her recipe, we kind of just did her same old thing, and we noticed we were looking for cookies that had a really crisp edge, that didn't spread, that held their shape really well, and we learned that, we learned that flour matters, and some of the cheaper flours out there would cause our same recipe to spread more. The edges weren't quite as sharp, and then if we're gonna just talk about brand names, we like the Lehigh Roller Mills flour, because it makes the cookies behave perfectly. So that's one ingredient that we're kind of particular about, and then your flavoring is something else that matters a lot.
And you guys flavor your cookie dough. You don't just leave the flavoring for icing.
Flavor both, and it's fun because you can make the icing and the cookie dough, different flavors, but flavors that complement each other. So. Definitely using good vanillas in there. You guys did a great thing with vanilla a little while ago, talking about all the different options that you have out there and which ones people prefer the flavor of. We've played with all of them, and they're all good. They're all something that I think you'd find someone that preferred each one.
So I was blown away, because with class we just generally share the traditional cookie dough and the buttercream. When I was looking at your website too, I was oh wow, they have expanded that for so many ideas. So I love that you did.
It's so fun. Don't be afraid to try a new flavor. That's kind of what when we get, let's try a new one. There's so many out there on the shelf.
Totally. And I think sometimes we look at a recipe and we're just I'll just stick with this. But you guys have helped us, give us that confidence to try new things. So I think the biggest thing that at least when I've experienced making cookies, I'll cut out a cookie and I'll think that it's going to come in a shape, and it kind of flattens out, spreads a little bit. So will you guys share us your technique with how you roll and prepare your cookies to be baked?
Yeah. So we have a couple of things that we think are really helpful so that you get a nice flat cookie like you showed them. Yeah. Especially with royal icing, it's going to be easier to keep that royal icing up on top if you have a flat cookie and sharp edge. Okay. So first thing that we do is we use these rollers that have kind of built-in guides. If you don't have one that has the guides, use guides, and that's kind of key number one is so that your dough is rolled completely flat.
And you like your dough to be about a 1/4 inch, is that
Quarter
right?
inch is kind of our standard thickness,
Okay.
yeah. So make sure you're using some sort of guides on your rolling pin to roll your dough nice and flat.
Okay. And so this is an example of the chocolate dough. This is just flavored with the guitar dark chocolate, and you do put some coffee.
Yeah.
And what does the coffee do in there?
So the coffee just richens the chocolate flavor, and definitely that's an ingredient to talk about with the chocolate dough is using a good chocolate. And you guys have also talked a lot about chocolate powders
I know
and
you
stuff.
and I
So.
have had some serious cocoa
Yeah.
conversations because I think it's one of those things that, you know, sometimes people don't always enjoy the intense richness of it. So I think sometimes you just have to be careful when you're doing which chocolate, because
Yeah.
we love it darker, but
yes.
my kids are like, oh, I think I'll take the Hershey's.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, I'm more milk.
yes, know your audience with that one.
You can definitely put the coffee in any of those, whether you're going dark or milk, and there really isn't enough coffee in the recipe where you're going to taste coffee, but it just really adds something that, you know, some people notice something about.
And I just use the Laurie
chocolate.
emulsion
Yep.
to just, so
Yeah, that's what we do.
it's just a subtle amount.
All right, so we have the dough mixed up. Just follow the recipe, and then we like to work on either parchment sheets or wax paper sheets.
I had parchment, but you oftentimes will say wax, just it doesn't slip as much.
Sometimes
right?
wax paper, yeah, it'll
Okay.
kind of just stick to your counter a little bit easier, but either one works great.
Okay.
Okay. And then this is our favorite way to roll them out too, just because it just makes it easy to deal with all of the dough. And I was just gonna break that.
Oh yeah.
And keeps your counter a lot cleaner because you don't have flour everywhere.
Well, and I also think it helps to not add too much flour to your dough, right?
Yeah.
So you've got your consistency that you want now, but when I've done it before where then I sprinkle flour over so it doesn't stick, but then it dries out your dough.
Right, right. So what we'll do is we'll place our dough on the sheet of parchment or wax paper, and then we put another sheet over the top, and a lot of times I'll just kind of press it down a little bit to get it started. And then we're gonna just roll our dough between the sheets of wax paper and parchment.
So with the wax, sometimes it
With the wax, it
right?
won't slide. You guys can hang on to it for me here. Perfect.
Is it too tough?
We'll get there. We'll get there.
It's been sitting in a cold room for a while.
So I'll kind of just roll it. The nice thing about this rolling pin too is it gives me the flexibility. I can just kind of turn the dough and roll both directions. So I'll keep rolling until everything is completely flat.
I do love these ones with like the exact, because it gives you a little bit more room. Sometimes I notice when I use the rings, it has to come in a little bit.
Yeah. And this just it gives me plenty of space to just roll it. Once it's completely rolled out flat, then we'll just grab both sheets like this and stack it over on a cookie sheet. And depending on how much dough you're making, you know, you can have just one on there, or you can have a whole stack of them, and they go in the fridge to get nice and cold.
Well, I
till
love
they're
that
really
you
firm.
just like stacked them in there, so you can and then bring them out one at a time to then cut your dough.
Yep.
So magic of TV.
Okay.
We do have some that is chilled, tell us like your method for cutting and then getting them ready to go on your bake.
So if you're in a huge hurry, sometimes we'll actually throw the dough sheets in the freezer, and then that way they need to sit for maybe 15, 20 minutes.
You don't want them to get too hard. 'Cause
Right.
then you can't cut them, yeah.
And then in the fridge, how long do you normally leave it?
Maybe about half an hour.
Okay.
Really, when you pull your sheets out of the fridge, you'd almost be able to stand the sheet up like on its
Oh,
end
okay.
because it's that firm.
Okay, so that's about what you're looking
Yep.
for. Okay.
And then if they're frozen, I'll leave them on the counter maybe while the oven is preheating, just so that it can soften a little bit, so that I don't damage any of the cookie cutters as I'm trying to cut the cookies, and also so that it will just cut through nicely. If I'm pulling it out of the fridge, it just needs to sit for a couple of minutes, not even quite that long. So you pull it out, and then I release that top layer of the wax paper or parchment, and then I almost lay it back over the top and then flip the whole thing over and then release the bottom paper. And then you can just leave that one off to the side now. So it still has its wax underneath it while I'm cutting. And then you just place your cutter and try to push straight down. That'll help get you a nice crisp edge on your dough. And then the dough is firm enough that I can handle the cookies just like this. to lay on the cookie sheet. If your dough's too soft, it stretches, and that's what you're talking about. Like you have circles that aren't circles anymore.
Or the edges,
Yep.
you know, like when you talked about how you want it to be like really flat. Someone go,
Yes, yeah. And then, so once you get your sheet full, and you don't want to overfill your sheets, you know, typically we're cutting about 3-inch size cookies and maybe like a dozen on a cookie sheet.
Okay.
And then you want to bake your dough while it's cold as well. So,
so say if it took a little bit longer for me to cut some of that, or you have kids that are helping, and you never know what's going to happen then, would you suggest putting them back into your fridge to chill them before baking?
So usually at home, I'm working with one oven, and in the time that it takes me to get my first cookie sheet cut and on the tray and in the oven, while that's baking, I can continue to cut more cookies. And so I fill up sheets, and then I just put those right in the fridge.
Okay.
And they sit in the fridge until it's their turn in the oven, and that way they stay cold.
That's so nice, especially because I think sometimes when I'm making cookies too, I get really anxious to then put them back in the oven as they're coming out, but chances are I'm putting them on like a warmer cookie sheet.
Yes, yeah.
And so it's already starting to kind of melt that butter and things like that. So keeping
Yeah.
everything chilled will help give us those like perfect, successful
Yes.
nights, right?
Yep. And we'll go straight from the fridge to the oven. Like we
Okay.
don't let them sit out for a few minutes or anything like that. We
And
don't do
I know
that.
every oven is different, but about how long do you normally bake them for?
That's a hard one because every oven is very different.
Get to know your ovens.
Yes. So at home, like on our recipe, I think you'll see that it says 375 degrees. In an old oven that I used to use, that was it. And it was like 6 minutes, rotate 6 more minutes.
Okay.
And then now I have a different oven, and I have a gas oven, which is not the best for baking. But when I do that oven, I do 365.
Okay.
And I do 8 minutes flip, and then it's usually like another 5 or 6.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yours about the same?
Mine takes a little bit longer to
Okay.
bake, so it's kind of like you said, get to know your oven. And we do like to turn the cookies halfway through baking, and
Okay.
so you can kind of just play with it and keep an eye on them. And we like to make our cookies where, like you saw with Heather showing you, their edges aren't browned. We like a softer bite on our cookie. And so just keep an eye on your cookies and you'll figure out.
Is there
how
some
long
things
for
that
your
you
oven.
look for because you don't, because generally they're like, oh, until it's lightly brown, but you're not wanting these to be brown. So is there something you're looking for as far as texture that will kind of indicate, okay, we're close to being done?
The centers aren't shiny anymore.
Okay.
So yeah, in the oven you can peek at them, and if they're still a little doughy, they're very glossy, and then they'll all of a sudden kind of matte over, and that's usually right where you want them. So
And then how far in advance would you say someone could make some cookies? So say if I have a party coming up in the next few days, could I make these ahead of time, or what's the best way to do that?
sure.
Absolutely, we love to do that sometimes. So bake the cookies and they freeze beautifully just like that.
Okay.
So we'll just put them in a like a Ziploc bag, and then we like to put the Ziploc bag inside of a Tupperware just so that when you move them in and out of your freezer, they're not
Smart.
banging around on each other.
Or a kid takes a popsicle
Yeah.
out and
Yeah.
moves things
So
around.
we'll just bag them, and we don't put anything in between the cookies.
Okay.
We just stack them and bag them, and then in a Tupperware, airtight, and in the freezer. And then when you're ready to decorate, we just pull them out, leave everything sealed up, and let them sit out on the counter for an hour or two to thaw out, and they're ready to go.
So smart. Because no one wants to do all of this on the day.
Yeah,
right?
right. That's a long day. Yes.
Any other tips you recommend for cookie baking, making?
Not that I can think of. Just the whole not using extra flour. If that's something that's new to you, that's a big deal as far as being able to use all of your dough. Because like you said, if you're rolling out with flour each time, by the time you're to your last piece of dough, the cookies are not going to behave the same as the first.
They're so crumbly.
They're very tough, and they have no spread to them, so
Yeah.
they're just like bricks. So our mom's recipe is where we started with our recipe, and we adapted things to make it behave more like what we wanted. And she used to roll out in flour, and hers were that way. The end cookie was always very small and tough. So if this is new to you, definitely try this. You'll like it not only for the cleanup reason, but
Yes.
all that you can use every scrap of your dough.
And we will re-roll this and use it
Okay.
again. So re-roll it, and if it's warmed up, it goes back in the fridge to wait to get nice and chilled, so we can cut it again when it's chilled, and just keep rolling that dough and using it again. Just keep it cold.
Smart. So smart. We've got Jeanette and Laurie. We're so happy to have them. Stay tuned. We're going to have 2 new videos that will talk about decorating with royal icing, and then another one with buttercream. So look forward to those. But thanks, ladies, for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And we'll see you next time.